In late 1872, the merchant brigantine Mary Celeste set out on what looked like a routine job, an Atlantic crossing to the port of Genoa. She sailed under Captain Benjamin Briggs, an experienced American mariner trusted with both ship and cargo. This was not a war voyage or an expedition. It was business, a schedule, a destination, and a plan to arrive, unload, and move on. Briggs did not sail alone. He travelled with his family, turning a working passage into something closer to a moving household. Alongside them was a small crew hired to keep the ship moving and safe, day after day. Every role mattered. On a brigantine, seamanship was not optional. It was survival. At departure, nothing suggested danger. The Mary Celeste left as thousands of ships had before her. Below deck, the main cargo was industrial alcohol, packed for sale overseas, valuable but also demanding care. On paper, it was straightforward freight, counted and stowed for a paying customer. At sea, cargo shaped decisions, how the ship rode, how it was ventilated, how closely it was watched. Still, the expectation stayed simple. A normal crossing, a steady run east, and a captain who intended to deliver everything intact. Partway across the Atlantic, the crossing stopped feeling routine. The sea state worsened, and a working ship began to take hard, repeated impacts. With every heavy roll, small leaks that normally stayed manageable became harder to ignore. Water started collecting low in the hull, in the bilge, where it could not be seen from the deck. It was not dramatic at first. That was the problem. It kept building without warning. On a sailing vessel, the bilge was where trouble announced itself late. When water rose there, the crew relied on pumps to keep ahead of it, turning a hidden seep into a constant job. Pumping meant time, effort, and a simple calculation. Were they gaining or losing? If the level dropped, they bought confidence. If it held steady or climbed, every hour felt more expensive. The ship could still sail, but now it also had to be emptied. As the weather pressed on, the need to pump reshaped the voyage. Routine tasks competed with a threat that never fully showed itself. The crew had to assume the water came from somewhere, and storms had a way of making small faults seem like major damage. Each new surge could have widened a seam, shifted the load, or simply overwhelmed the pumps for a moment. Anxiety grew from that uncertainty. Because if the pumps ever fell behind, the sea did not negotiate. On December 4th, 1872, another ship crossed the Atlantic lanes, the British brigantine Dei Gratia. Her crew spotted a vessel ahead that behaved wrong. It did not answer, did not hold a steady course, and seemed to wander with the wind. Closing the distance brought a shock of recognition. It was the Mary Celeste, still afloat, still under sail, but clearly not under control. The captain of Dei Gratia sent men across in a small boat to find out what was happening. They climbed aboard, expecting trouble, injury, sickness, or a crew hiding below. Instead, they met silence. No one came to the rail. No one moved on deck. The ship did not look smashed open or sunk low in the water. She looked usable. That contrast made everything feel worse. They searched through the vessel, and the result stayed the same. The Mary Celeste was abandoned. Yet the signs of normal life remained. Personal belongings were still there. The cargo still sat in place. Nothing suggested a frantic stripping of valuables or a fight over supplies. It was an empty ship that still had what an empty ship should have lost. The mystery had a hard, undeniable starting point. Once aboard, the boarders stopped guessing and started counting facts. The ship still carried her cargo and most of what people normally grabbed in a crisis. But the sailing gear told another story. Lines sat slack where they should have been tight. Some rigging looked strained and damaged, the kind of wear that followed hard weather or a hurried attempt to control the sails. It pointed to trouble on deck, not a quiet, planned departure. Then one absence locked the mystery into place. The lifeboat was gone, not lowered and trailing, not smashed on deck, simply missing. That mattered because it meant the crew likely left intentionally, and they left together, choosing the only craft made for evacuation. It also meant they expected to survive away from the ship, at least long enough to be found. Whatever frightened them, it pushed them off the deck and into that boat. The log narrowed it further. Its last entry sat near the Azores, a clear position and a recent date compared with the day she was found drifting. Between that note and the missing boat, a small window opened for when the abandonment happened. The damaged rigging suggested a period of strain just before it. It gave investigators something rare in a maritime mystery, a timeline and a rough patch of ocean to match it. When Mary Celeste reached Gibraltar, the recovery stopped looking like a lucky find and started looking like a legal problem. Maritime salvage meant money, and money demanded a hearing. The court needed to decide who deserved a reward and how much. But an abandoned ship with valuables still aboard raised an immediate question. Why had nobody been there to claim it? That uncertainty pulled officials into the case. A formal salvage hearing required facts, not guesses. So the ship's condition, the cargo, and the crew's actions all mattered at once. If the abandonment had been innocent, the salvors looked like heroes. If it had been staged, they looked like suspects. The line between rescue and wrongdoing turned thin. Each missing item and each damaged fitting began to carry a new weight under oath. Suspicion did not need proof to change the tone. It only needed a plausible motive. Salvage payments could be large, and authorities treated that as a reason to test every story. The hearing pushed beyond counting cargo and setting compensation. It asked why a seaworthy ship had been left and whether someone benefited from that choice. By the time proceedings moved forward, the mystery had become an official investigation. At Gibraltar, the case stopped looking like simple salvage and started looking like a possible crime. Investigators treated the empty ship as a scene that had to make sense. They asked one blunt question: who benefited? That focus turned quickly toward the men who found her, the crew of Dei Gratia. If Mary Celeste had been deliberately abandoned, then a salvage reward could have been the motive. So the Dei Gratia crew faced close, uncomfortable scrutiny. Officials weighed their movements, their timing, and how they described the discovery. They compared those statements against what was physically true on Mary Celeste. Any mismatch mattered. If the ship showed signs of a struggle, that pointed one way. If it looked carefully arranged, that pointed another. Suspicion did not need proof yet. It only needed a plausible path. On the ship itself, investigators looked for the basic markers of mutiny or murder. They checked for blood, weapons, and damage that suggested violence, and they examined whether valuables were taken or left. They also studied what was missing, especially the lifeboat, because that spoke to planning. A staged abandonment required control. A real panic left chaos. The problem was simple and maddening. The evidence refused to land cleanly on either side. Away from the courtroom drama, another explanation started to look less sinister and more practical. The ship carried industrial alcohol, high-proof, volatile, and packed in barrels. If even a few containers seeped, the liquid itself mattered less than the vapor. Alcohol fumes could build in enclosed spaces, especially down in the hold. That kind of smell did not just mean a leak, it suggested danger. On a wooden sailing ship, danger did not need a visible flame to feel real. A lantern, a match, even routine work near the hatch could have seemed like a spark waiting to happen. Investigators later considered a scenario where Briggs detected fumes and assumed the next step was an explosion. Not a certainty, just a risk he could not measure. The safest move could have looked obvious. So the decision shifted from saving the voyage to saving lives. Briggs could have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a temporary retreat, expecting to stay alongside and return once the threat passed. The plan only worked if the boat stayed connected and close. But at sea, small separations became big fast. If the line parted or weather pushed them off, Mary Celeste sailed on without them. Maritime historians later argued that the key problem may not have been one single disaster, but uncertainty stacking up fast. Navigation in the mid-Atlantic depended on clear sightings and steady conditions. After rough weather, those certainties weakened. A captain could have believed he was closer to danger than he really was, closer to reefs, closer to a lee shore, closer to trouble. When confidence in positions slipped, every other warning sign felt louder. Storm damage also changed what the crew thought they knew. A hard blow could have strained seams, shifted gear, and sent water into places it did not usually appear. The ship's pumps became the daily test of safety, but pumps could lie. They clogged, they lost prime, they moved less water than expected. Even the simple act of sounding the hold could go wrong, especially in a moving ship, and a bad reading could have turned concern into alarm. Put together, those errors created a dangerous impression that the Mary Celeste was filling slowly but surely. If Briggs believed the water level was rising, he faced a brutal choice. Staying aboard might have meant waiting for a sudden, unstoppable failure. Leaving early could have looked like the only disciplined move, buying time in a lifeboat while keeping close to the ship. But that decision depended on one assumption: how much water was really there. Once the abandoned ship reached shore and entered the public record, the facts no longer stayed inside court files and ship logs. They moved into newspapers, where editors competed for attention and speed. Each retelling leaned harder on the strangest parts: an intact vessel, people missing, no clear struggle. Careful details blurred, rumour filled the gaps, and a puzzle that had been narrow and technical started to sound like an unsolvable nightmare. Headlines treated uncertainty like proof. A missing lifeboat stopped being one clue among many and became a promise of drama. Ordinary damage turned into signs of violence. Small timing questions became claims of conspiracy. Popular magazines simplified the investigation into a single hook. Someone must have done something terrible, or something impossible must have happened. The more the story travelled, the less it behaved like evidence. It behaved like entertainment. Then fiction writers picked it up and locked the mystery into a new shape. They added motives, villains, and clean endings that real inquiries never produced. Those versions spread farther than the boring parts of the record, and they lasted longer. Over time, many people learned the embellished Mary Celeste first, and the actual clues second, if at all. Public belief shifted. The legend began to outrun the ship. Today, the Mary Celeste no longer sat in the category of ghost stories. It sat on a table, like a puzzle, with a small number of hard pieces. The ship had not been burned. The cargo had not been looted. The crew had not vanished without a trace of intent. Most modern explanations treated the abandonment as a decision, not an impossibility made under pressure with limited information. The strongest theories followed a simple pattern. One risk triggered another, and caution turned into retreat. Alcohol fumes or a suspected leak suggested danger that could not be seen, but could kill quickly. Rough seas and water in the bilge made that fear feel urgent. If the pumps, the soundings, or the captain's estimates seemed wrong, the numbers could have looked catastrophic. In that moment, the lifeboat stopped being a backup plan and became the plan. Once the crew left the deck, Every small dependency mattered. A tow line could have snapped. The ship could have surged ahead as the wind shifted. Distance could have opened fast, leaving the boat behind with no way back. That chain did not need villains, monsters, or magic. It needed ordinary people making a series of reasonable calls, each one narrowing their options. The enduring shock came from the contrast, a routine 1872 departure that ended in absence.